It's time for Mr. Fundamental!
Presented by no one.
Coming off a finals appearance, the Miami Heat has been disappointing this season. Expectations were high for this team, especially factoring in developments for the young players. It's easy to point out the difference between the team's stats this year and last year, but the more interesting question is why it is, since they mostly kept the same roster. Of course, the whole COVID situation and the injury bug did no favors for them. With a 10-14 record, they're far from where they want to be, so let's check out what's happening and whether it could be fixed. A big part of the Heat's success last year were the handoff sets and causing chaos with off-ball movement, whether it's to get shooters open, catch defense off guard with a cut, or getting a ball handler one step ahead of defense. The Heat have strayed away from these off-ball movements prior to handoffs because of a few reasons. 1. The Heat lost a combo forward to slot into the power forward spot. You can see how Crowder has a perimeter game to interchange between the off-ball screener or being the one receiving the ball. This time, he flares out for the 3 when the defense cheats off him. They have resorted to playing Olynyk at the 4, and don't get me wrong, he has the shooting and off-the-dribble ability, but probably more effective against centers. Olynyk's center instincts also reduces flexibility for their off-ball movement. Here, Olynyk is setting a screen, and hit Bam near the elbow. This sprint by Robinson is great, but Bam turns it down. Now, usually they have some off-ball actions going towards a Bam handoff, but Olynyk got the sag treatment and then curls to receive the ball. As expected, this wasn't a huge threat, but Bam bails them out with a jumper. Again, Olynyk is a screener, rather than getting Bam involved in this possession. He does get a mismatch here, but I don't think that's the Heat's first option, with Dragic, Bam, and even Robinson on the floor. After the fumble, they hit Bam at the elbow, and typically this would turn into any version of a handoff. Dragic and Robinson run some off-ball actions, but get stymied by Olynyk trying to get low post position, and preventing a slip opportunity. It didn't matter though, because Bam throws it out of bounds. Iggy is another candidate that the Heat slotted for. His jumper isn't respected, and that impact is self-explanatory. Iggy was excelling off the bench being the handoff initiator next to a stretch 5 in Olynyk. Playing next to Bam now, he's being more of a screener off the ball, which is why the Knicks top-locked hero, but also prevented the back cut without the fear of Iggy popping out. The Heat flows in the handoff towards the other direction, but there's no opening on the drive or on the roll, since Topping sagged in the paint. His cut just packs the paint, and the clock becomes an opponent, up until Bam bails them out again. This is more of a roster problem, so there isn't much the Heat could do about it, barring a trade, or maybe a bigger role for Harkless. Now if you add in having players coming in and out of the rotation, chemistry becomes part of the problem and leads to turnovers. The Heat have struggled with turnovers since last year, but it's gotten a lot worse. They just threw away the ball because of some confusion here. Another reason they strayed away from these off-ball actions before a Bam handoff is because of Bam's offensive development. He's been amazing working as the roller, flashing some of that jumper, and even some mid-post ISOs. Since he starts his attack in the same area as his handoffs, off-ball players seem to be reluctant to do any screening in case they're blocking off his driving lanes. Once Bam catches it in the post, I would expect some off-ball screen that could lead to a handoff last year. With Bam's ability to score, their weak side has been more stagnant, meaning weak side defenders could help an attack, and KD gets a strip. On the other hand, just having some off-ball movement when Bam has it out on top. The defense is occupied, and Bam has a quickness advantage against most bigs, getting into the lane here and floating it in. I did realize that when Bam isn't looking at his teammates, there isn't going to be any off-ball action, which was a huge factor for their success last year. I think there's more of a process for Bam's development, trying to balance between staying aggressive and sharing the ball. Another impact this has is that defense isn't out of position compared to a screen prior to the handoff. Quickly was able to get around the screen, and the Knicks can contain this like a typical pick and roll. None gets swarmed after picking up his dribble, and it goes out of bounds. This has the biggest impact on Duncan Robinson. He's been lights out in the Heat system last year, and still doing his thing this year. Dig a little deeper, there's a slight increase in terms of contested looks, and decrease in open looks. What's more is that the lack of off-ball action has led to him creating off the dribble more. We can see this in his ball handler play type, slight uptick in pull-up shooting, and his average dribble per touch. Tuning into a Heat game, you'll see a little more of Robinson running a pick and roll, or taking a few extra dribbles after handoff to create separation from his defender. Now even a shooter like Robinson took a hit in terms of his 3-point percentage this season, so think about what this would do to a streaky shooter. Answer? A big dip in the team's 3-point percentage, going from 2nd in the league last year to 22nd this year. Now it's not like the Heat completely abandoned their screen into handoffs, because they're getting great results when they do this, but it's only in recent games that I've seen more of this, like the ones against the Knicks. Moving on to the defensive end, the biggest change is their efficiency in guarding isolation, and this could be attributed to the availability of Butler. Their best defenders available are Bam and Iggy. while their best offensive players like Dragic, Robinson, and Nunn can't exactly hold their own on a regular basis. With that said, the Heat have a pretty good defensive system to cover for these players. Dragic is on Kyrie, so when the double screen comes, Olynyk hedges to get the ball out of his hands. This also results in weak side rotations, like Bam tagging Jordan, but since his man is KD one pass away, he recovers when Robinson rotates over. This is great stuff and top-notch communication, but they have to give up something, and that's open threes. On this pick and roll, Bam shows up high until Vincent recovers. He continues to shadow quickly, maybe a little too much, but once the ball hits Gibson out on top, the weak side is outnumbered and they give up an easy score. In semi-transition, Middleton goes into a post-up against Robinson, causing Bam to dig down a little longer to help out. All this leads to a pretty good look for DiVincenzo out on top. Comparing the opponent's threes this year and last year, it doesn't seem like much has changed in terms of attempts, so they've been implementing this pack to paint, help and recover system for a while. The difference is the rate their opponents are making these shots. Of course, having to rotate over for average defenders could have a hand in that, but I suspect there's another reason. With Butler unavailable for half their games, Bam has been their best option to put on their opponent's best wing. Check out how Bam is on KD, while Olynyk takes Jordan. Bam holds zone on this possession and gets a hand up on the KD pull-up triple. Turn your attention to the paint, and Jordan has inside position. He gets the offensive board and the putback. Bam's impact was on full display last year, being the backline of defense. He allows the Heat to have a bigger margin for error, either swooping in for the block after a miscommunication out on the perimeter, or he'll just rotate over and add that extra layer of pressure at the rim to force the opponent to come up empty-handed. Playing more on the perimeter has forced Bam to be away from the action, and teams have been taking advantage of that. Kyrie has Dragic on him, while the Nets run a double pin down for KD on the other side. Bam is fully occupied, so on the drive by Kyrie, Olynyk doesn't have the same effect as a deterrent at the rim. In other words, Bam is not in position to make up for errors, like this backdoor when Nunn fell asleep. If Bam and Struss swapped positions here, Bam would be meeting Kennard at the rim. Lastly, it's all about the defensive versatility. One of the biggest selling points of Bam's defense is its switchability. With a frontcourt of Bam, Butler, and Crowder after the trade deadline last year, the Heat could essentially switch everything between them. On this handoff into screen, Bam and Robinson switches. When Williams rolls, there is a mismatch, but Crowder's presence allows for a pre-switch and eliminates the advantage. He can still do it now, but that also means weaker defenders like Robinson or Hero are picking up opponent's top option. A quick spin towards the baseline gets Tatum right to the rim. If the help rotation comes, then we go in the full circle, because this help defense leads to open triples from deep. On this handoff, Bam is unwilling to switch, since he wants to stay on Jokic, rather than Olynyk picking him up. At the same time, this acted as a screen that forced Olynyk out of position. Weak side has to rotate over, and a dump off leads to a close basket. The first pick and roll leads to a switch of Hero on Baines. Bam pre-switches and picks up Baines, but now Hero is on Siakam. Not a favorable matchup here, and Siakam just drains the three. To wrap it all up, I don't think we need to worry about the Heat. All the problems I've listed could be fixed, and they just won their last 3 games. Having players like Butler and Bradley coming back, it'll give them additional defenders to minimize overhelping. Offensively, they've started to return to their roots of screen into handoffs in their past few games, but don't expect the same change as they had after last year's trade deadline, because they're still missing a combo forward to slot between Butler and Bam. If they continue this strong stretch they've been having, they could solve this roster issue at the trade deadline. Maybe Aaron Gordon, Otto Porter, or even Thaddeus Young could be potential targets. As for Bam, he just needs a little more time to balance his scoring and facilitating. Also, it seems like their offense is calmer and more willing to do these off-ball actions when Butler is on the floor. Maybe it's because of his stability, and they know they can rely on him to bail them out if the clock runs down. Butler's return also provides another scoring option for them, which will allow for other creators to carry their second unit, and coincidentally, Hero has been balling over the past few games with Butler's return. Lastly, despite their success last year, the Heat's core pieces are still pretty young, and development is rarely linear in the NBA. The Heat is just another example of that this season. Add in the cap space they have in the offseason, this team's trajectory is still firmly moving upwards, instead of an expensive aging core that many analysts makes it sound like. Anyways, let me know why you guys think the Heat are struggling to start the season, and maybe some things I've missed out in the video. As always, drop a like down below if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys next time.